Hi, this is Lady C. Welcome to Hidden Struggles. And in the upcoming episode, I'm going to be having a conversation with Gail Kelly. And she recently contacted me to give me an update about her story that was featured on our EXJW Critical Thinker sister channel, talking about her father and his deathbed confession. So, Gail, welcome to the platform.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad to be able to talk to you again after the first time I interviewed you with your father and the deathbed confession. I mean, that was such a heartbreaking story to hear that information that you were sharing. What I'd like to do is share a clip from a previous interview that we did with Gail talking about her father and his deathbed confession.
My father just died about 6 months ago, and he had a horrible deathbed experience. And so for such a devout elder for 60 years to have a crisis of faith on his deathbed, it was really, really hard to take. And it's never discussed. Your deathbed experience is never discussed in the hall. You never go and say, oh, we planned our funeral for such and such. You don't discuss things like that. You don't discuss 20 years down the road because, well, Armageddon's coming. So you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about your deathbed because, well, Armageddon's coming soon, around the corner. You never, ever put any thought into your deathbed experience. And every one of them are going to have one. And with my experience with my father, he went into the hospital, and I didn't know that until I got the call from my mother. And so he wanted me to go visit. And I thought, this is the script. This is where I get called in. I'm allowed. They have labeled me an apostate years ago, but I'm under the understanding that your deathbed or maybe a funeral, they're a little more lax with the rules. You're allowed to contact them. You're allowed to go to the funeral. You're allowed to express your condolences, and then that's it. So when I went in to see Dad, he was there. Yes, your family, and I don't know if I'm going to get out of the hospital, and I wanted you to hear it from me because, your family. And he repeated that 3 or 4 times before he said, oh, I don't know what else to say now. And I thought, that's because your script ended. There's no more script. So I said, fine. And I left, and I called my family in England, his sisters, and said, Dad's in the hospital and he doesn't expect to make it. And they said, okay. So they kept in touch because I wasn't allowed to keep in touch. So about a week and a half later, they called me and said, maybe you should go see your dad. And I said, because he's still in. And I said, oh, okay then. So I went in and I saw a completely different man, no longer an elder. A man who realized he has devoted himself to an organization instead of his family. And at the end, he had no family around him. The organization doesn't show up on your doorstep. And he cried, and he cried. After a couple of hours, I just had to go home because it was so heartbreaking to hear him. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I wish I had done things different. I have done nothing but lay here and live with my regrets, and it's all I can think about. And I said, okay, Dad, I'll come back tomorrow and I'll bring pictures. Because in the meantime, I have been shunned since I was 17 years old. Kind of soft shunned over the years, but basically they've had nothing to do with me. I've gone on to have children. They're grown-ups now. I have 4 grandchildren that my parents have had no dealings with at all. So the next day when I went to see him, he was so sad. And I started showing him pictures of his great-grandchildren. And he just started sobbing at how much he missed out on his life, on my life, on his great grandchildren, the only great grandchildren he has.
So, Gail, you want to kind of talk about how things have been?
Well,
Your dad.
since then, I thought life was very quiet, a little sad. And then last year, I got a call from my daughter that she was asking me, like, did you know that your mother died last week? And I said, no. And there had been an obituary, and sure enough, she had died. She had been dead for a week before I found out. And that was even more heartbreaking than the original when my father passed.
I can imagine. I mean, I am so sorry to hear about that and the fact that no one said anything. Now, before you get into the story of what happened when they had her services, do you want to kind of share how your relationship with your mother was during the time your father was on his deathbed confession?
Well, before he got sick, he had labeled me all by himself an apostate. So he didn't, as far as I know, didn't go to any of the congregation people. Just because of something I said, he decided I was an apostate. So that's how, when you're an apostate, I guess they're not supposed to talk to you at all. And so I haven't had any relationship with my mother whatsoever. She bypassed me once with a car full of women out in service, and they all waved to me, and she turned her head. And so that's how seriously they took the apostate label.
Let's talk about the apostasy label that your parents gave you, because the audience needs to understand that you're not disfellowshipped right now.
No.
At this point, you have not met with any elders. You have not had a judicial meeting. None of this has taken place, but your parents have labeled you as an apostate. Please tell them what led to the labeling.
Okay, well, I had a couple of questions for Dad. I came across the book Crisis of Conscience, and I mentioned to Dad about all the stuff that had happened in Malawi, and that's the time period I grew up in. When I came across the book Crisis of Conscience, I noticed that there were a lot of irregularities from when I was taught. And regarding lots of things, but a lot more to do with the persecution of brothers in different countries. And when I talked about this to my dad, and he said, well, an apostate wrote that book, so it's all lies. And I said, well, actually, it's not lies, because it's all the stuff that I was brought up on. And now it's like there's more truth in this book. And he said, well, if you continue talking like that, then you are an apostate. And I said, okay. And I said, apostates aren't liars. And, and so that's how they labeled me an apostate.
So keep in mind that in the Jehovah's Witness religion, you don't have to be writing a book about the organization.
No.
And you don't have to necessarily be talking and eating or sharing a meal with the person. You could just be reading their material.
If you were caught reading that book, you would be labeled an apostate, because now it's almost like your eyes are opened and there's no going back.
Right. But think about this too, Gail. When you look at your father, he didn't take you to the brothers, right?
No.
Isn't that interesting how he just shunned you, but he didn't take you before the brothers? Have you ever thought about why he didn't do that?
I guess the label of apostate is I could be wrong, but it's like if you're labeled an apostate, there's no reason to go any further. Like Dad was such an elder in his own mind that what he said went. And if he decided you were an apostate, then it didn't matter what anyone else said, because what I said was, obviously, if I'm going to believe all of these so-called lies, I'm an apostate too.
What was your relationship with your parents like before this, confession about you reading this Crisis of Conscience book?
Well, since I left at 17, there was really nothing. It was, I could call, like maybe once a month I'd call, how are you doing? But I wasn't in any family loop. I wasn't associated with them whatsoever.
Okay. Did you have any siblings?
One sister, and she has remained in the organization with Mom and Dad, 18 months older than me. And she was the one that stayed.
Okay. So you're coming from, like, based on conversations that you and I have had in previous discussions, you were coming from a difficult family life anyway, to begin with. And just tell the audience, what it was like when your parents met, and explain to them about what happened after they met the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Well, what happened, just as, years of listening to both of them, like when they got married, they were kind of each other's rebound. And within a couple of months, Mom, got pregnant with my sister. And then 18 months after that, she got pregnant with me. But in the meantime, I think they realized that they did not even like each other. And in this time period, the witnesses came knocking on the door, and Dad was like, well, I don't know about this. And they said, well, Armageddon's coming, and it is going to destroy all wickedness. And we're all, who are Jehovah's Witnesses, going to live forever in a peaceful earth. And we're all going to love each other. And plus, we don't celebrate Christmas. And Dad said, that is the religion for me. And Mom, I grew up with Mom saying, I wish Armageddon would hurry up and get here so we can all be put out of our misery. And it's like, if you were that miserable, why did you stay in this religion or with Dad? And they said, well, it's the only way that we're going to get life forever. That's how I grew up.
See? So here we have a family that's already having issues.
Yes.
And like you said, they're rebounding, they're in this relationship. And then the Jehovah's Witnesses come knocking, giving a hope. So you got people who have problems, but now the Watchtower heaps on more problems.
Yes.
Now, when you think about your situation, you have an issue where we all know what happened. They kept moving the goalposts. The Armageddon is in the corner, around the corner. Now they went around 10 corners, and it still hasn't done anything, right?
Yeah.
So at this point, your mother has lived her entire life. Your father's lived his entire life in a bad relationship, not realizing that we don't want each other, and we're still waiting for Armageddon to save everyone.
Yes.
Right?
That's exactly what it was.
Yeah. So the situation is this. Do you think that if the Jehovah's Witnesses would have never knocked on your parents' door and they would have, told them about this new system, Armageddon and all that, do you think your mother would have stayed in that relationship?
No.
See? And so why did she stay in the relationship? We all know what the answer is, and you're going to tell us what that is.
Because they weren't allowed to divorce.
And even though I know that, you want to tell the audience who may not be Jehovah's Witnesses, help them to understand what goes on with Jehovah's Witnesses and divorce.
Well, you're not allowed to divorce. You are allowed to divorce. but you are not allowed to remarry unless your spouse has committed adultery.
And yes, that's basically what happens, you know. And so a lot of people, they've never heard that before, that you get married and now the only way out of this marriage is someone has to commit adultery.
Yes. And with that adultery, some of the stories that I've heard since the last few years, there has to be proof.
I know a situation like that right now myself, that the person won't give the husband the divorce. And so it's been 20 something years and he's still waiting to see if he can marry somebody in the congregation. And she's still sitting over here saying that that's not true. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So people don't realize it, that this religion really just messes up lives. You already had a life that was in distress, or a relationship in distress, and now they just heaped on a whole lot more problems, right? And then we have children involved in this situation, you and your sister. So what kind of a relationship did you have with your sister?
We were not close even as children. And I don't understand that. Some children, I guess, as children don't get along, but we never got along. And, looking back, it was all, she was quieter. I was more outspoken. I was the one that's, well, you're not allowed to do that. I would be the one to say, well, why not? And my sister would just go, oh, okay. And I would say, well, why not? Why aren't we allowed to do that? Why are there so many rules? And I often got, just be quiet and do as you're told.
So you were the outspoken one. You were the troublemaker in the family.
I was a troublemaker. I was the black sheep. I was whatever. You made everybody's lives difficult because you were willing to say out loud what nobody else wanted to say. Exactly. And I was labeled the difficult one, the one that doesn't do as she's told, the one that just won't listen. She's doing her own thing. And it's like, if they could only understand, the only reason I didn't is because they could not answer why.
Oh, you kept pushing the limits. So remember what your mother said. Your mother said, I can't wait until Armageddon gets here to help us get through this terrible life we're living, right? So now you're rocking the boat.
Yeah. I'm saying, then why did you marry him in the first place?
A lot of times, we think, in our modern world today, there's a lot of people don't get married, like they did back in the day. And women, depended on their husband's income more so than they do now. So a lot of women were in these relationships and they just could not, make it on their own. So your mom, she was really in a situation.
She was. And she tried to just make the best of her situation as she could. Like, she pioneered and she had her friends. But in the background, there was also me not doing as I'm told. I mean, I found out, you can record this or not, but I found out when they moved over into a congregation, and they were in that congregation for about 20 years. When I was working at the hospital, I met somebody from that congregation through somebody else. And they said, oh, we didn't know they had another daughter.
Wow. So they never even talked about you?
Nope.
So they just wrote you off like a bad check?
Wrote me off. There are people that did not even know I existed.
How did you feel about that?
I'm torn. One part of me feels very validated in that I made the right decision back when I was grade 4, 17 years old, and then escaped. At the other time, it's like I was right about them all along. They have no loving side of them whatsoever. The organization could not give them love. This was something I didn't mention in the last interview. There were actually 2 visits. The second visit was the one that I had the tearful confession. The first one was the one where he decided that he was just going to tell me that he was on his way out, he was going to die soon, and he thought that it was best to come from him, nobody else. And I said, okay, then, like, thank you for telling me. And he said, you were always a disappointment to us as a family. And I said, well, yeah, I know. And that was it.
So here's the thing. I'm going to say this. Okay. So the sad thing about this whole scenario and the story is the fact that once a person gets involved with this religion, there are things that you are unable to do. And one of those things was during the time we were coming along was going to a therapist. So the things that your parents were dealing with at that time, if you would have had counseling or someone outside of a religious group that's just trying to suck you into their belief system so that you could just follow whatever they wanted you to do under their leadership, you could have gotten help as a family. And I really feel like your family they were embarrassed by your actions of asking questions and not really wanting to be in this religion because they really were looking forward to this Armageddon.
Exactly. And it was almost like, looking back, it was almost like I was going to be the one that stopped them from getting this eternal life. So they had to completely shun me because they didn't want to find out what they were missing out on by watching me have my life. And, like, I was brought up in the 1973, 1975 bull. Nothing but lies. Its whole organization bases everything on fear. It's a fear-driven organization. You have to do this or you're going to get disfellowshipped. And it's imminent. It's around the corner. And back, like I say, in my day, I wasn't even supposed to graduate. I wasn't, and there was no word on going to university. I mean, that was just a waste of time and a waste of money. And here I am retired now. It was nothing but lies.
That's right.
And now they're trying to soften the lies. They're trying to, back in my day, you couldn't get your ears pierced because you weren't supposed to put holes in the body that God gave you. And now that's all changed. And now you're allowed to even say cheers with a champagne glass. And, now you're allowed to wear pantsuits, the women. Men are allowed to grow beards. And it's like, and I'm sure that the people in the organization now are saying, well, when weren't you allowed? Back in my day, you weren't allowed.
Well, things have changed. A lot of things have changed. And, when I look at the way the religion, kind of operates, it's like they have people that come and go and you have people that get older and die, right?
Yes.
You get people who just fall off the beaten path and they just don't go back. And then you got people who come in and they don't know the changes. They don't know what we've been through. And that's really the design of the organization.
I know.
That's the reason why the new light is always talked about, because they never say that they were wrong, because if a person said that they were wrong, that's going to stick with you more so than somebody just saying, oh, this is a light change.
Yeah.
So what happened after that second visit?
After that second visit, he got well enough to go home. And here, you would go home with home care. Like if you're not sick enough to be in the hospital, but you need home care. So they sent him home with home care nursing staff that drops in your house. And then, he died 3 months later.
Oh man, sorry to hear that. But what happened in between? Because at this point, he's having a deathbed confession. He's allowing you to come in. He's crying and so forth. So when he gets home, how is he treating you now?
That last visit, I called a couple of days later at the nursing station, and they put me through to Dad. And I said, "Hi, how are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm going home today. And if you're not going to be part of the organization, then you're not welcome back into the family."
Okay. So then he cut all ties.
All ties.
And was this something he wanted, or was it something that someone was coercing him to do?
It was my mother, because in the course of the conversation that we had, he said that Mom had thought I was like the devil in disguise coming in to wreak havoc in their beliefs. And I said, "Dad, that's not happening. Like, I'm just here to see you." And he said, "I know that, but we have to convince your mother." And she wasn't convinced, obviously, because I never saw him again.
Wow, that's pretty bad. And this is all because you read a book, Crisis of Conscience, written by former governing body member Raymond
Yes.
Franz.
Yes. Yes.
So now your father passes away.
Yes.
And then your mother gets sick, but you had already stated that she had already passed when they told you. How much time lapsed before your mother passed?
Between Mom and Dad, it was about a year.
Oh.
Maybe a year and a half.
Okay. Okay. And during that year and a half, based on the fact that they didn't tell you about her passing, I'm assuming that you didn't have a relationship with her. What was it like?
Well, she never allowed herself to have a relationship with me. So,
Okay.
So I didn't even know she was sick. And then my daughter phoned me and said, "Did you know your mother died?" And I said, "No, she died last week." I said, "No, I didn't know." I was very upset. It was very upsetting for her to have to call me and tell me that my mother had died. She was almost traumatized. Like she was saying, "No, Mom couldn't know this, or she would have told me." So it was very, and like, she's got 3 kids, my daughter, and this is her grandparents she's talking about. And this is what she had to do, was call and tell me that my mother had died.
Okay, so now your daughter finds the obituary on Facebook. Had they had the services yet at that time?
No. It was almost like I found out on a Friday and the service was Monday coming up. So, because that's what it said in the obituary, that's how I found out. So I got to the service and I sat in the car for a few minutes because I was really nervous. I didn't know what to expect. And I saw my family, like my brother-in-law, my sister, and my niece, drive in their car. And so I got out of the car and my niece started screaming at me in that parking lot. As soon as she saw me, "You don't belong here. We don't want you," screaming. "We don't want you here. You don't belong here." And then my brother-in-law started screaming at me too and started blocking my way into the hall, like standing in front of me. He had a cane, so he was like leaning on the cane, trying to stop me. And so I was just kind of like, I kept moving forward around him. And he kept moving forward in front of me. I guess I was supposed to be scared and turn around and go home, but that didn't happen. And so when we got to the door of the Kingdom Hall, he was still screaming. And then he started telling the elders in the hall to make me leave, that the family didn't want me there and that it was their responsibility to make me leave. And of course, they didn't, because they said, "No, we're not going to make her leave. She's more than welcome to come here. She's, you know." So when I went in, a couple of the sisters came over to me. "Oh, it's so good to see you here." And I said, "I only found out last Friday that she died. Nobody told me that she died." And they were saying, like, what? And I said, yeah, he was there trying to get the elders to put me out because nobody wants me here. And and so a couple of other sisters came over, and I said, I just found out a week ago that mom was dead for a week before I found out. And it's like they were, oh my God, they were in shock. They were in shock because they were supposed to come over as a group, the sisters, and help get me back.
Oh,
That's what they do. Oh, it's so good to see you here. Oh, come and sit with us. We'd love to see, we'd love for you to come back. It's like, really? I only found out she died last week. And I just went over that like every couple of times, every couple of minutes, somebody new would come to the circle. Before the talk started, I had maybe 10 sisters around me, all listening to me saying, I only just found out last Friday that mom died last Friday. They didn't tell me. How could they not tell me this? What is wrong with these people?
well, you know what, too? The Jehovah's Witnesses have made changes in the organization because they're losing so many members.
I
And
know.
they're trying to get people to come back.
Yeah.
And so they're thinking, oh, why would they do that to their daughter or her sister? Why would she do that to her sister when we're trying to get people to come back? That's not how we're trying to do this. So at that point, your family had a long history of just shunning you, and they could care less about what the Watchtower was trying to recruit.
Exactly. Yep, they just took it on a personal vendetta to abolish me from their world. And so I went on about this so much that before the talk started, 2 different sisters came over to me and they said, we are so sorry that you had to go through that with your sister. That's how fast the gossip spread.
Wow. Is her husband an elder or a servant?
He's not even in there. He got baptized years ago to marry her and then never went to the meetings after that.
Oh my goodness. So you know what? When you look at situations like that, isn't it interesting how people who are just on the fringes themselves are always somewhere trying to keep somebody else down or turn somebody else in, and they're not doing nothing either?
Yep.
How are you coping?
This has been my whole life since I was 17. So, and I'm now I'm going to be 64 this month. So, just under 50 years, I have been living like this. And a lot of therapy. I think I have an ADHD brain. And what I think that gave me was a critical thinking skill. And because even when I was in therapy, my therapist would say, how did you know so young? It's like, I don't know how I knew. Now, as an adult and with all the new terminology, if I have an ADHD brain, that's why. I have the critical thinking skills, and I was able to critically think my way through my life. I had a lot of emotional issues with this. How can your parents do this? Then I became a mother myself, and you have that love, right? I had this critical thinking mind that always asked questions. Of course, in that religion, you're not allowed to ask questions. So since they both passed, it's like everything in my life is being validated. Everything I thought was validated with regards to the cult, the worship itself, my parents. Everything I thought was just validated by them being gone. And they never, not even when I was a child and in the cult, they didn't show love to me and my sister. So that never changed. And so with regards to how I feel, I felt a lot lighter when they were gone. There's no more supposedly disappointments that I'm giving them. That's gone. And so now I just get to concentrate on my life, me, my daughters, and my grandchildren, and my partner and his family. And it's wonderful.
Well, I'm glad that you're not, really having an issue, but because you said like you've been navigating this terrain for a long time,
Long
and you just
time.
went ahead and accepted what was with the hand that was dealt you. But looking back on what was going on, do you think that you would have not talked about the Ray France book to your father?
No, I would have anyway, because he needed to be told.
Okay, so you have no regrets about that.
I have no regrets at all. I stood my ground, and I wasn't the one that was lying. I wasn't the one that was like, all I was doing was saying this book that people are not allowed to read. It is the truth is in that book.
What kind of advice would you give to my listening audience about your personal experience? What do you think that they could learn from your life experience?
Thanks so much for giving me this opportunity. And I just want to let your listeners know that there are resources out there for you. You're not alone. There are plenty of us on the outside of this cult that can direct you in how to get the help you need, because you're going to need some. And there is help out there in resources like your channel.
So, Gail, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story. Like so many other people, you are one of so many people that have been shunned, and you have made your way through all these processes. You understand. And see, I think that, you understood it because you researched it. You understood what you were in. And a lot of times people, they may not realize what they're in, and they think they're the problem. They think they're the reason why people are shunning them, when in fact it's the choice that you made to leave that's making people shun you. You can't be part of this group unless you are part of, not questioning. You can't question,
Exactly.
you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so this has been Lady C, and I'm going to leave the details in the description to the link to Gail's previous video where she interviewed about her dad's deathbed confession. And I'll see you all on the next episode.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Hidden Struggles with your host, Lady C. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to stay connected with us.